All right. Welcome to the first Migrant Show webinar Zoom cast thing.
Yes. Good evening, wherever it is that you are. I think it's evening for most of us. My name is Christy Brooks, and I am coming to you from Michigan. So, but tonight we would normally be in Arizona at Southside Presbyterian Church in the Kiva, welcoming you to the Migrant Trail, but obviously this year is different, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I want to welcome each and every one of you here in this space, as you are wherever it is that you are. We're happy you're here. We're delighted you're here. And tonight we'll move through some important things, some of which will be announcements, some of it will be reflections, beginning our reflections and learning that we have together as a community, no matter where it is that we are. So we're thrilled that you're here, and we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing I should do, that we would like to do as a group, is to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we would normally be gathered today, the lands of the Tohono O'odham. We're honored and grateful to be able to be on their traditional lands, virtually or not. And then I'd like to just take a moment as well to recognize the organizing committee members. You may see them as you scroll through. We won't take time tonight to introduce ourselves, but you'll see us throughout the week, and you'll benefit from the work that many folk have done. So I'll just list these in alphabetical order: Brother David, Chandra, myself, Eric, Jody, Kat, Lupe, Magda, Margot, Mike, Olivia, Tom, Samantha, and Saulo. And then one other name, I just want to thank Roberto Mendoza for providing interpretation for us tonight in Spanish as well. Okay. So here we are on Zoom, and obviously this is a much different year because we're online instead of being physically together in the spaces in Arizona and Mexico. So we want to take a moment to recognize the limitations of that format. But be that as it may, I will say that the organizing committee, especially as somebody who came in exceedingly late to the organizing bit of things, the people who hold up the Migrant Trail year after year have put together some incredible reflections, readings, and then of course the presentations that we'll have every night during this week. So while yes, it's not a year like any other, it is an incredible year just the same, in the fact that we're able to gather. And there are some more incredible things that I'll share with you in a moment. Before we go too much further tonight, though, I'd like to invite Saulo to talk a little bit about how we'll be structuring things this week over Zoom. Some of us may be incredibly familiar with it. Some of us, this may be the first time we've used it. So Saulo is going to talk through some of those things right now.
Hello, everyone. So for the first part of this webinar, we will be all in as panelists, and you will be able to open your video at some point, and we'll be able to see your faces. We wanted to see your faces and want to interact a little bit, but then we will return everybody to be an attendee, and then you will have only be able to see the speaker and the presentation and be able to listen to them. In the bottom of your screens, you will have then at this point, the chat is open, but then when we go to the way that we'll be doing after this, and you'll be an attendee, then we will like you to, if you have questions or comments, then to put them in the Q&A box below, or in that chat area when it says Q&A. And you will be silenced, everybody will be silenced. All of us will be silenced except for the presenter. And And then we will be able then to open up the mic just for the people who are presenting at that point. I think that will be it. For the people who are just joining us right now and are looking for interpretation, you can select the Spanish channel below, where it says interpretation, and then mute the original audio. Para las personas que nos están entrando ahora y que quieren escuchar esto en español, pueden seleccionar interpretación en español en la parte de abajo y poner en mudo donde dice mute original audio, apretar allí para que el inglés, la parte del inglés ya no la puedan escuchar. Gracias.
So real quickly, if you have a video, please go ahead and turn it on so that people can see you. If you wish, it's optional, of course. You don't have to, but we invite you to do so if that's an option for you, and that should be in the lower left corner.
So after that, thank you to our Zoom masters, Eric and Saulo, who are managing quite the rodeo tonight. So thank you to both of you so very much. Okay. I do want to say, and I'm not sure that Saulo talked about this, we'll have you all as presenters, and then we'll take a pause after we're done getting through the presentation tonight. We'll take about a 5-minute pause, bio break if you need it, to go take care of things, and then we'll come back to a Q&A session, at which point your status will be changed, but you don't have to worry about anything on your end. Okay, so just we'll let you know when that begins. Okay. All right. So the last thing, the interpretation, again, Saulo just mentioned that. If you need Spanish, to go and click on the Spanish language option down below. And then finally, I would like to invite folks to think about the daily reflection opportunity. That's a way in which you can write publicly or privately about what you've seen, heard, thought about for the day. And if they are made public, we'll be asking you if you are willing to share those things at the end of the Migrant Trail. So again, we want to give as many options as possible to folks, but we really, more than anything, just want to encourage the reflection that this week will provide. Again, for many of us, this is different. It's virtual, but for many of you, it's new. So take the time, carve out some time in your lives. We are all busy in different ways, but do take the time to reflect and think about what you're learning and hearing here. Okay. All right. So here we all are. And we thought you'd like to know a little bit about the group. And again, I would invite people to scroll through the different images so you can see who you're with this week. But I can give you some quick stats. We are currently 155 registered participants. Our youngest participant is 18 years old, and our oldest participant is 93 years old. This is fantastic. If there's one thing that a virtual Migrant Trail gives us, it's more participation. And I think those of us on the organizing committee couldn't be more thrilled to have so many people with us this week. So thank you for coming. So yes, you've seen 85 of us are participating in the Migrant Trail for the first time. So welcome wherever you are. Here's some quick stats. We're from all over the United States. Some of us, you can see all the different states from which we're coming at each other. And then also, we are also from Canada, from the United States, obviously, and Mexico. So you can take a look at this map. Gives you a wonderful illustration of where we all are. So again, I'll leave it up there for a moment for you to marvel at. But it is really, really wonderful. In past years, we've had, you know, multiple countries, but again, just the sheer number of us coming to each other from different places is incredible. So, okay. So we are so happy to walk with you together this week. And walking obviously is in different ways. We'll invite you to take time to get out and do things as you're able. But that will be different for each one of us, so we understand that. So we really are in unprecedented times. In the 17 years of the Migrant Trail, we've never had to deal with something like a pandemic in this way. Many of us are at home, confined to our homes for various reasons, and have little physical contact. And obviously we have the deaths and the illness and all of the everything else that's coming with the pandemic on our minds. But people are still dying in the deserts. So we want you to keep in mind, keep this in mind, and come together to bear witness in a new way, and to not bear witness this year, even though we are under these limitations. So, okay, now I am going to invite Magda to read the vision of the Migrant Trail to us.
Great. Hello everyone, I'm Magda. So I encourage you to also read this as I go through it. All right, so this is our vision statement. The precarious reality of our borderlands calls us to walk. We are a spiritually diverse, multicultural group who walk together on a journey of peace to remember people, friends, and families who have died, others who have crossed, and people who continue to come. We bear witness to the tragedy of death and to the inhumanity in our midst. Lastly, we walk this sacred journey as a community in defiance of the borders that attempt to divide us, committed to working together for the human dignity of all people.
Okay, and now I'd like to invite Kat Rodriguez to share with us her presentation tonight.
Okay, I'm going to pull up my presentation. Okay, so hopefully all of you can hear me. My name is Kat Rodriguez. I have lived here in Arizona since 2000. I have been really blessed, and I feel very honored to have been involved in a lot of different border justice work. And the purpose of this presentation is to sort of give you a sense of the reality that we in Arizona and we in border communities experience. And also, I think probably the most important thing we want you to understand is that the deaths are not accidents. They're not something that's just an unhappy side effect, that there is some intention and there is some really, really tragic things that are in that, and that's how we should be viewing what's happening. So if we had another 10 hours, we could go into, you know, the root causes. We are very blessed this week. We're going to have presenters who will talk about a lot of these different pieces, but it is really not a good way to think about the border if you're not talking about root causes, because you end up talking about, you know, how many miles of wall is needed, how many laws that are passed without recognizing the root cause of migration. And so long as we are not talking about why people are crossing, and I also think we should also be talking about the rights of people to be able to stay in their home communities, the rights of people to not be displaced, then we do a disservice to understanding in a deeper context what is happening on the border. And it's not something that is happening in an isolated way here in the US. This is happening globally. Migration is a global phenomenon. Um, and the areas are usually around, well, the three areas really, it's human rights, indigenous rights, and environmental rights. We have learned that, you know, as human rights activists, we are called upon to also raise up the indigenous rights issues that are involved, the environmental rights, in the same way that our indigenous rights allies and environmental rights allies do the same. These are interconnected. These are communities that are attacked and targeted in very similar ways. And again, we have some really amazing speakers this week who will talk on these other issues. So I'm really excited that that's going to happen. I won't go into those. So militarization, you know, that's a word that not a lot of people are used to if you don't live on the border. It's a strange word. Timothy Dunn wrote in his book that militarization is when the police act like the military and the military act like the police. And if you know anything about the way Border Patrol are structured, it's a very militarized structure. They are agents and they have operations and they have checkpoints and stadium lights and all of that. He also called what is happening on the US-Mexico border low intensity warfare, because how else would you describe a place that has the walls and the infrastructure and the checkpoints and the armed you know, agents and the people that are being killed on the border without understanding that that is an act of war, and there's really not another way to describe it, even if people want to cloak it in, you know, the right of our country to protect its borders or control immigration. This is how we have chosen to do it. We have chosen war. Prevention through deterrence has been the strategy that the US government has used since the 1990s, sort of with this idea that if we were to militarize the traditional places where people are crossing, we could stop it. It would also shift people into more isolated, desolate areas. The government reasoned that it would be more difficult for people to cross. It would be more dangerous, and that there would be hardships, and they understood that deaths were one of those hardships, but that those deaths would serve as a deterrent, that people would hear that someone had died crossing the border, or that they'd been apprehended, and that they would not come. We have seen operation after operation after operation, and I think Lupe Castillo will be talking more about some of this, but the bottom line is that all of the militarization that we have done on the border, the millions and millions and probably billions and billions at this point that we have put into the border, has not to any measurable degree successfully controlled migration other than where people are crossing. It has not actually affected the numbers. What usually affects the numbers more tends to be weather, it tends to be opportunity in home communities, it tends to be those types of things. It does not, it's not the fact that there is now more wall or more drag road or more agents, because the reality still remains that the majority of people do eventually make it to cross the border. Unfortunately, many of them die, and that has been something that has been our reality for a long time. And this is really what has been the inspiration of the Migrant Trail, is, you know, on a national scale. I'd invite you to think about how many elected officials on a national level or a federal level have you ever heard talk about the deaths on the border? And if you can think of anyone, it would be less than probably 5, if any. Raul Grijalva, who is here in Arizona and is the congressman with the most border in his district, is maybe the only one, but there is not political capital right now to talk about the deaths on the border. And that has been why you don't hear about them, you don't see about them. And that's where we feel that the Migrant Trail's work is to raise awareness, to bear witness, and to say that we see and we know and we understand. I like to show this slide because a lot of people will tell me, you know, Kat, this isn't about racism or the border. I mean, this is about homeland security and the rights of us to control our borders, its safety. So I'd invite you to look at the Grand Forks sector up here and tell me how many states you see in the Grand Forks sector. And I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I would ask you to tell me how many sectors you see in the state of Texas. Right, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think the El Paso sector has a, yeah, El Paso, so 5 or 6. So this is absolutely about Mexico. It's about the southern border. This is about racism. This is about controlling who is coming in. And this is not to say that we would wish what is happening on the southern border to be imposed on our northern sisters and brothers by any means. But this is something that we need to recognize and acknowledge, that this is about racism. It is about displacing. It is about, you know, controlling who it is, who is immigrating, who is migrating, and who we consider worthy. So militarization, you know, what does that look like for people who live on the border? What it looks like for us is more Border Patrol agents. Vigilantes have been a side effect of you know, that increased tension, and that's not something that's happened just in this administration. Vigilantes have been a presence for many, many years. Some people might remember the Minuteman Project, but even that has, you know, there have been vigilantes way before that as well. It is because the strategy of sealing down traditional areas and shifting people onto property, it has created tensions between local ranchers and others who suddenly have migrant flow shifted through their property. In the last probably in the last decade, we've seen that the cartels, you know, there used to be people who crossed, trafficked in people, who were coyotes that brought people, and then there were drug smugglers. And what we've seen is the entrepreneurship of the drug smuggling rings that have now control both. So these corridors get controlled. They also, many of them have at gunpoint forced migrants to carry drugs, or are told to carry drugs to pay for their passage. So that's something that's increased. And the deaths have happened since the 90s. They've increased on an amazing scale, which I'll talk about a little bit more. The other side effect is the tension between local government and federal government, because you have local hospitals who are getting people evacuated from the desert with kidney failure, who are in severe distress. And, you know, as hopefully we all know, emergency services are federally mandated in the US. So if you go into the ER, you can't be denied treatment if you're dying. But the local governments, the local communities are not reimbursed by the federal government, which is really the reason people are being pushed into these areas. So it's created this tension between state and federal, where you start to hear state officials that'll say, well, the federal government's not doing anything, so we're going to pass these anti-immigrant laws, or we're going to do this to create barriers for, you know, quote unquote illegals. So these are all the things, these layers and layers. The border is not simple, it has layers. It's also got generations of pain and injustice that is, you know, really, really complex situation, but these are some of the things that it looks like for us who live here. The traditional, does my mouse work? Do you guys see my mouse? Okay, so here in Arizona, what used to be the traditional flow, when I first moved to Arizona in 2000, people were crossing in the Douglas O Prieta area, and within a few years it shifted to Nogales. So people were crossing up through this corridor in Nogales. As the wall began to be expanded, this shifted over to the Sasabe corridor. So people would come, they come to Altar. In Altar, if they don't already have a coyote or a guide, they would get one there. And then they would make the trek. If they had money, they would be in these vans or pickup trucks, brought all the way here to Sasabe, and then they start walking to the east and to the west from there and cross in these areas. If they're crossing this way, they're in Coronado National Forest, they're in the Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge, which is part of where the Migrant Trail walks. And if they go to the west, they're on the Taunatham Nation, and we'll hear more about that. What we've now seen recently is now in the last several years, this is the Sasabe corridor is also very heavily controlled by the cartel, and people are also now being shifted over to Caborca and then up over more towards Lukesville. And all this really has done is push people into these extremely, incredibly isolated areas where it's, you know, even less likely that they would be able to flag down someone for help, or that someone would find them. And so you get even more casualties, and the result of that is usually by the time people are found, they are skeletonized remains, which makes identifying them even more difficult. So I put these, I added these slides because I was giving a talk one day, and someone said, what do you think would happen, you know, if they're successful and start putting up walls in Arizona? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, if they start putting up walls. So just to set the record straight, no matter what you might be hearing, there already are about 650 miles of fencing and wall across the border. And that has already existed. That has long existed. So people who are continuing to say that we just need this to solve the problem are not recognizing we've already been doing this and it has done nothing except make contractors and private corporations very, very wealthy, but not really doing anything other than creating death. There's a couple different types of fencing. There's the pedestrian fencing that's really to just prevent people on feet. There's a couple different styles. Some of them have the mesh. They've learned that they need some of this to let the water through. There's all different styles. Just down here on the bottom right, this is what the border looked like when I first moved here. These are landing strips from the Vietnam and Persian Gulf War that were turned and welded into the wall. And let me see if I have one. So this is what it looks more like now. These long walls that have these like almost like posts, and they go, I believe, about 10 or 15 feet down and then go up. Maybe not 10 or 15, but a fair amount into the ground. It hasn't deterred by any significant amount the number of people crossing, but you can see it would be a huge prevention to wildlife that need to access the border for continuing. And again, we'll have a speaker later in the week who will talk about this, so I won't go too much into that. There's also some areas they have a double fencing where they have one wall with the strategy is somebody would jump over one wall, and in the time it took for them to get to the second wall, then agents could be there on scene. There's vehicle barriers with the intention of just stopping people from driving, but what ends up happening is, like, you know, a drug smuggler, a vehicle with drugs would come up to this wall and a vehicle would come to the other, and they would transfer it over. So again, not super effective. Vehicle barriers are a little they do at least allow more wildlife through, but there are some of our environmental friends have told us that there are certain animals that won't cross human created roads. And so it is devastating that. And again, Dan Millis will talk more about that later in the week. I just like to show this slide because this right here in the picture is Friendship Monument, which is supposed to be a testament to the friendship between the United States and Mexico. And it has been encased in concrete and steel matting. And I think that we should just be really recognize that, you know, Mexico is our #2 trading partner. We haven't been at war with Mexico for like 150 years. But this is how we have created this relationship with our neighbor, with our relative for many people. And it is truly, it's truly outrageous. It's really just offensive. So the other thing to know about Arizona is that we are sort of, I joke and tell people we're like the opposite of Vegas. Like, what happens in Arizona is they're not going to stay in Arizona. We tend to be a place where really horrific laws and bills are tested out and passed here, and then they're exported. They're turned into a precedent and then exported to other places. All kinds of things have been tested here. There have been a ton of environmental protection laws. Also, some of the laws that will deny bail to people. The criminalization, some people call it crimmigration. Operation Streamline, which is not just happening here. The Real ID Act, which I believe Dan will talk more about, but there is a piece, section 102 in the Real ID Act, basically says that the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security can waive any law that he or she sees fit in the interest of Homeland Security, which is completely counter to how we understand when we learn, like in 4th grade, how a bill becomes a law and how that works. That's not how it works if they invoke Section 102. The other effect of this is when you bring an armed force into a community, and usually many times these agents are not from border communities. I know about 52% of Border Patrol agents are actually Latino, but that doesn't mean that they're Mexicano or that they are from a border community. What you end up doing with that is people coming to the border who are not aware or not informed about the border. There has been documented violence by law enforcement that goes back to the 80s and 90s. Physical assault, verbal assault, sexual assault, racial profiling, which I would like to point out does not just happen to immigrants and migrants. Racial profiling happens to people of color. There's also been issues on the nations where you know, some of the elders don't speak English and they don't speak Spanish. They speak their traditional languages and have been held at gunpoint or been threatened because the agents don't recognize where they are or the communities in which they are. And that harassment and racial profiling is something that people are not just feeling on the border. Tucson is 60 miles north of the border, and Phoenix is even further than that, and there are consistent complaints against the federal law enforcement of Border Patrol and ICE about some of these things. High-speed chases have resulted in many, many deaths of migrants where you have a severely overweight vehicle loaded with like 25 people in a van will end up being chased by a Border Patrol vehicle. It will turn a sharp corner, go flipping, and people go in all directions. And some of the times they have, you know, there have been allegations that Border Patrol has fled the scene, so they're not there and they don't document it. There have been many, many deaths that way. If you look at some of the old migrant deaths charts that are available, a lot of them you'll see the cause of death as blunt force trauma, and that usually has to do with a vehicle, them being in a vehicle. There's also abuse that has resulted in death while in detention, while they're being held, and then there have been the shootings. And I'm just putting a few of the people who are victims of the Border Patrol shooting and killing them. Carlos Lamadrid and Bennett Patricio Jr. and Ezequiel Hernandez are all US citizens, and actually I think all 18 years old when they were murdered by Border Patrol. And all of them in the US, all of them on US territory. In Ezequiel Hernandez's case, he was on his family's ranch. And Bennett Patricio Jr., who's a member of the Tohono Nation, was on his way home, on his way to his grandmother's house, and was run over about 1.5 miles away from her house. And there has not been justice for them. They're a small number. And many of you might have heard about Claudia Patricia Gomez Gonzalez, who was shot by Border Patrol 2 years ago while crossing in the Rio Bravo, and just 20 years old. We'll have more about the issues around Indigenous people, but the displacement of Indigenous peoples from Guatemala and Central America has been created another layer of issue where a lot of them do not speak Spanish. They speak their native language, Indigenous languages, and many times the agents don't provide interpretation. People are not advised of their rights. There's no efforts to get interpreters for them. So this is just another layer of abuse. Many years ago, there was a senator that made a comment about these Indigenous aliens. And I would just invite you to ponder the oxymoron of being an Indigenous alien who is murdered on land that you didn't cross any ocean to get to. And traditionally, we know on the border that migration is a natural human phenomenon and has been done since time immemorial. So death as a strategy, in the sense that Arizona was picked as being a place to be funneled. There is a study by the National Migration Institute called the Funnel Effect that talks about how you can look at the numbers reported by medical examiner offices, the Pima County Medical Office, Henry County Office of the Medical Examiner is a great example because they've done just amazing work to actually differentiate. Notice, you know, when people are a migrant, it's marked in their system, so we can actually have numbers. So you can see from the 1990s, all in the 1990s, the numbers did not go much over 20. It was only 1 year that was 21. And we started to see this spike in 2000, really when militarization started shifting people in a even more ramped up way into Arizona. And you started to see that. It was around 2006, 2005 and 2006 that we really saw an explosion. And 2009 was a devastating year of 2010. These numbers have gone down a little bit, mostly because, well, one of the reasons would be that people are being shifted to even more isolated areas in the desert. So I don't have a current chart to show you, but this is and I would invite you to read the study. Our website that has a lot of the resources includes some of these studies, which I think is important for people to be aware of, because we're often looked at as these, you know, angry brown activists on the border who are talking about these things. But there has been research, there are numbers, the deaths tell a story, and this is about, you know, people intentionally being shifted here and criminalized and demonized. And so Arizona made the news in 2006 because they ran out of room in the morgue for all the remains that were being recovered. And so they had to rent a refrigerator truck to house some of the remains so that they could get them processed and forensic exams done on them. And many times, many medical examiner officers don't employ a forensic anthropologist, because most of the time when people die, they come in and there's an autopsy, sort of like you see in CSI, right? Or any of the shows that you watch. There's an autopsy, but when you're talking about someone who has been in the desert, there's not flesh, there's not a liver to weigh, there's not tattoos. I did abuse documentation and intakes for missing family members for many, many years. And used to go into the morgue and look at the different effects that were left with people. And I've talked to, you know, many a relative who said, you know, she has a mole on her cheek. You know, did you see the mole? Is it her? Did you, you know, or there's a birthmark, you know, or a scar because he fell when he was 6 and he cut open his leg. And it's a really awful thing to to try to explain to a family member that there's not a cheek left, that there's not a leg, there's no skin. You had to just sort of say like that, you know, they were there too long in the desert. That's not something you can see. And I think that those were some of the most difficult, where it was trying to explain to a mom or a husband or a child that their loved one is just bones, is just skeletal remains. And that's what the desert does. It is an efficient environment. It does not discriminate. It doesn't care who you are. It will take every drop of liquid and moisture you have in you. And between the animals and the elements, you are very little in a very short time. And this is just another layer, which makes it more difficult to identify people, which is now why many times it's now gone towards DNA. This number is outdated. It's actually 8,000 now. The remains of more than 8,000 men, women, and children have been recovered. And we say recovered because we know that there are more people that have perished in the desert and their remains have not been found. Every month remains are found, and when they are brought in for their forensic exam, the time of death is usually estimated 1 to 3 years ago, or it could be 6 years ago, it could be in the last 3 months. So we know that this number is a fraction of the real number. We don't, you know, anyone who tells you they know exactly how many deaths have happened we just don't have that information. So the real number is an unknown, but what we do know is that many, many people have been reported missing. We know many of them are out there. So if you were to tell me that number was double or triple, I don't have any way to tell you it isn't. There are a lot of missing person reports that would support that. We just don't know. most commonly the cause of death of people who die on the border is exposure to elements. So that is dehydration. It's also hyperthermia, where it's too hot, their body overheats. There's a point at which your body gets so overheated that even if you had water, your brain shuts down. In the winter, people don't think of the desert as a cold place, but in the winter, the desert is brutally cold, and especially down in the Cochise County, and even down in Nogales, there are people who die from the cold. Also, drownings is not something people tend to think, that you would drown in the desert, but we have flash floods. We have monsoon season. We also have people down in Nogales who are trying to cross through some of the sewage tunnels, and if a flash flood happens, people have drowned that way. Then there's also people who've died by gunshot wounds, and then automobiles, that's usually where vehicles, massively packed, flip and people die. And that has led, again, to difficulties in identifying people when, honestly, if someone were to die in a car accident, the chances of identifying them is better, because they're probably on a road and they're probably going to be recovered within within an hour or two of having died, whereas the others, they're in isolated areas. And many of the times the people who are found in the border in these isolated areas are found by ranchers, they're found by people hiking, they're found by law enforcement or Border Patrol who are out there on patrol. One of the beautiful things about Arizona is that it is also a birthplace of resistance. I know that Lupe will talk a lot more about this. I kind of just put this list up because I think it's really powerful to see that there has been resistance to what is happening by community members for many times. And even these are actually established organizations, but even more than that, their individuals have responded. Marches, protests, actions, solidarity, sanctuary. I mean, there has been resistance. And to me, that is where the hope is. That's where the change comes from. And that's where I hope you all feel called, even if you, well, actually a lot of you are already called to that, but if you aren't, I hope it will be an invitation. The funnel effect, this shows, it's a little hard to see, but the port of entry, commercial zone, actually I'm gonna skip this slide because it's a little difficult. What I wanna do is, this is the way I like to end this presentation, many years ago, a doctor who was working with Humane Borders started to take the UBC, or unauthorized border crosser, lists that were produced by the medical examiner's office. They would take the GPS locations. So agents, whenever they find somebody, they're usually in the desert. So there's not like, he was found at the intersection of First Street and 12th Avenue. What they are is in the middle of the desert. So they'll take a GPS location. So he took that information and created these maps to show where remains have been recovered. So I'm going to do these next slides in silence. I invite you to just look and understand a little bit, to see that, what we on the border are talking about truly is a human rights crisis. It truly is devastating. It's something that more people need to know about. It's something that I hope you will all learn about more this week and feel moved to talk about in your home community. So with that being said, I'm gonna just go through these slides one by one and let you just see them. And it starts in 1999. So this last map here is 1999 to 2019, all of the deaths or the remains that have been recovered on the border. Well, actually, not just on the border. As you can see, some of them go up pretty high. And then I just like to end with this. This is from a mural down at the Camin in Altar, Sonora. And it says, if we don't think differently, everything will be the same. So I would like to invite you all this week to be open to thinking differently about the border, about the communities that you're going to meet this week. And I look forward to hearing more from you and reading reflections. So that is, I think that's it. Yes. And I will turn it back over to Christy.
Thank you, Kat. Okay, let me just share my screen again. And there we go. Hang on a moment. Oh, so actually, I'm going to turn it over to Meta now, who is going to share the special note from the organizing committee and a couple of other slides. Especially given what you've just seen, this is pretty important.
Who did you say, Christy? I'm sorry. Oh, Magda? Okay.
Sorry, trying to unmute. Okay. So yeah, so please keep in mind these things. So please be aware that we will be discussing difficult situations of injustice, loss, and death this week. We encourage you to center your emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being in all aspects of the Migrant Trail and take whatever steps you need to take to care for yourself. This participant agreement we have developed through more than a decade of walking and living together in close community. Some principles may translate more or less to the virtual environment, but we ask our participants to agree to the basic principles and values here stated. So yeah. Next slide. All right. So this is our participant agreement. It's going to help us all come together and share safely. So in signing up to participate in the virtual Migrant Trail, you are joining a community of diverse individuals with varying backgrounds, experiences, and reasons for choosing to walk. As our journey is a collective one, we ask that you join the walk in active cooperation with your co-participants on the Migrant Trail. And by signing this participant agreement, we agree to participate in the following disciplines. All right. So first thing, we will convey through my words, symbols, and actions an attitude of openness, acceptance, and respect toward all people we encounter, including representatives of groups with different perspectives. Next, I will participate in nonviolence and refrain from using insults, put downs, swearing, or verbal physical assault upon any person. I will also refrain from sexually inappropriate language or behavior. I am willing to learn new methods or customs related to moving and being in other people's space. I will respect the faith, custom, and experience of fellow walkers. I agree to take responsibility for myself and to use my voice responsibly to share with the group what is and isn't going well in a constructive manner. I will respect the day schedule. I will make an earnest effort to modify any behavior that causes conflict or is counterproductive to the spirit of the walk. and if I am asked to lead the walk, I agree to comply and cooperate as requested by organizing committee members. Okay. And then I think I got to pass on the torch to someone else.
Okay, I think it's me. Okay. All right, thank you, Magda. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this week and what we'll encounter. So the first thing is morning reflections. So each day participants will watch a video reflection, which we'll invite you to use at the start of your day with intention. And then throughout the day, we invite all participants to take an opportunity to get out and be in community with nature as you are able, in whatever way that is safe and makes sense for you. For some of you, it may be your deck. For some of you, it may be the local park. Get out and if you're able, and commune. Okay, so that's the first thing. So beginning with intentions. Next one are your podcasts and readings. Each day participants listen to a podcast or read a suggested reading at their convenience. These will come in your emails, and you may have seen some of these things already. We've attempted to interweave the morning reflections with the podcasts and readings and the featured speaker for the day to create a space of deeper contemplation. Again, we know we're in different contexts, but this is actually one of the ways that I will say for myself, I'm incredibly excited to move through the Migrant Trail in a different way with these things that the organizing committee has put together, and they're really fantastic. So, and then finally, the featured speakers. Each day, a featured speaker will give a brief webinar style talk, followed by a Q&A discussion like we're doing tonight. These will be done in the Zoom format and will be recorded and made available for participants to watch at their convenience. So you can join in live, or there will be a recording made available later. It takes a while to process everything on Zoom, so those will come out. Featured speakers will be each day at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time or Arizona time, and so on and so forth for the rest of us throughout the different time zones. So, am I missing anything? Kat? Anyone else? If not, we'll move on to the questions. Don't be shy.
So this is the part where we are going to need to we're going to take a 5-minute break while we get shifted over to the other. You'll all be attendees, and there'll be at the bottom a Q&A. There's a little Q&A option. You don't have to do anything on your part. It'll automatically redirect you. It'll take a few minutes for our Zoom masters to do that, and you'll see the Q&A, so you can put your questions and answers once we're over in that side.
Real quickly before we do that, I just want to give everybody an opportunity to sort of scan through the cams, and you can kind of see everybody. Not everybody has a camera up, but these are the people that we're going to be virtually walking with. And I know if you have a camera, I encourage you to go ahead and turn it on just for a few minutes, or just for 30 seconds, and then we'll start transferring everybody over back to participants, and then we can start the Q&A. So see each other, smile at each other.
I know, I'm seeing lots of familiar faces, so I'm thrilled.
It's wonderful. I know you can't talk to each other right now, sorry, but it's good to see all your wonderful faces. All right, so go get a snack. Oh, sorry, go get a snack, take a potty break, whatever you need to do.
At 35, we'll come back.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Christy.
See you soon.
So if you have a question, you can go ahead and click on the Q&A part. We will try to get as many questions as we can, but we may not be able to get to everybody's questions, just so you know. But we'll try and manage that as best we can. Some of you are already, I see, typing questions in, so thank you for that. Okay, I believe we have everybody over. Hopefully it is about 35 after, whatever time zone you happen to be in. Thank you all for giving us a moment to switch everybody over.
Thank you again, Zoom Masters, for your quick and wonderful
The
work.
Zoom Masters. Sorry.
So I see that we have quite a few questions, so we'll take them as we're able. And again, I would invite those of us helping us to interject if need be. And I think Kat's going to take the first question from Carolyn.
Yeah, I will read it so that everyone, if you're not accessing your chat or if you're on the phone only, how do the authorities see the migrant trail walkers? As an irritant, or are they welcome due to being mostly Caucasian? It seems like that aspect of the walk would be unnerving, meeting up with Border Patrol and vigilantes. So I would say that one of the most important things to know about the migrant trail is that we totally and completely recognize the privilege that we all are walking with. We are not simulating or trying to pretend that we know what it's like to cross the border. You know, we put up easy ups, you know, we have shade. People can jump into a vehicle if they need to, if they're hurting. There are folks to tend to them. In the early years, the majority of migrant trail were white participants. That is it's less white now. I'd say that we're probably maybe 40% are people of color. But I think we still are perceived mostly as a white group that's walking and, you know, very visible. Mostly the Border Patrol is slightly irritated by us. We go through a checkpoint one day and we symbolically, as we cross the border, because we start on the Mexico side and walk for 1 mile, and symbolically as we cross the border, we all surrender our passports and IDs and put them in a lockbox, and we only walk the whole week with our badge, which is just our name. And that's an act of solidarity and sort of a symbolic thing. And there's a point where we go through the checkpoint where, you know, you don't have to have ID on you, you just declare you're US citizen. And we've had varying interactions with Border Patrol over the years. There's one year they had a helicopter over us, dusting us in the middle of the night. We've had agents come up to some of our campsites and interact. One of our organizing committee members, Margot Cowan, outreaches to them ahead of time to Border Patrol, lets them know that we're coming, we're not hiding anything, lets them know what days we'll be where, and I think that does help. I personally feel myself that one of the roles that we have is to be an irritant. is to raise awareness, because we can take it, because we're privileged, like we have that ability, and I would rather bear the brunt of that than people who are in more vulnerable positions than we are. So for the most part, I would say that it is, I think the whole thing about Migrant Trail is an invitation to be uncomfortable. You're physically uncomfortable. You're in a 24/7 with a group of people. You don't know everybody. You don't have a lot of control. The desert is unforgiving, you know, and it's sort of an embrace of that. And I think that that discomfort is part of it. I always tell people that our job on the Migrant Trail is not to make you feel good about the border, because things are not right on the border. You shouldn't feel good about a place that is very, very wrong. And we are trying to raise awareness about how wrong things are and how bad things are. Yeah, I mean, we're irritants, but we're safe. I mean, we're, you know, we are probably the safest people crossing that any given day that we're out there. And so it is a practice of embracing that. It's a practice of just understanding our place. And I think it's an invitation to use your privilege. Too many of us with privilege don't use it to be the irritants that we should. And I would invite more people to test drive that a little. So I'll also answer the second question that's asked. It says, will we have access to some of the slides to share with our congregation? I will look into that. This is work that, a lot of it's my work that I've done. And so I do feel a little bit like I want to be careful with it. I will say that the maps, the death maps, I think there was also a question about the maps with the deaths. Those are, you can get those on the Humane Borders website, and we can send out information to tell you where to get those. You can actually do them for different years and see those numbers. You can also see the lists. There's some congregations that do services to recognize migrants who've died and have used the names on those lists. So that's something that we can share with people. Does anybody want to share a short, can one of the experienced walkers share a short story experience that could give us a sense that there is a reason for hope? Does Christy, Magda?
Yeah, I was going to invite Magda first if she wanted to. She's got a good story on hand. If not, I can. Well, go ahead, Magda.
Oh, I was just going to, off the top of my head, probably not. So you go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think one of the incredible things that happens on the Migrant Trail, and this isn't always visible to folks who haven't been on the trail, is the community that's formed. And so as you follow your walkers' lives once they return home, and I'm thinking in particular, and I am completely blanking on the name because I have a microphone in front of me, but Colorado, Sarah, she created
Jackson.
Sarah Jackson. Yeah, what's the name of her? Why am I forgetting?
Casa de Paz.
De Paz, that's what I thought. Okay. You know, she came on the Migrant Trail with us and was inspired to go home and create a space, a living space for people just coming out of detention and helping them in the next steps. And it is an incredible organization. A book has just come out on it. And so you see the quiet, long work of people you walked with come to fruition in some pretty incredible ways. I mean, that is just one story among many others. And I think that is what the Migrant Trail helps to promote. And then just telling stories. So again, in the quiet spaces of individual conversations as people head back home, within my own family, within my own community. I'm in rural Michigan. Hearts and minds change, and the Migrant Trail allows for chances to talk about those things. So Kat, do you have anything to add to that, or Magda, or anyone else?
I can share a story. We had been walking, I don't remember what year this was, but we had been walking 6 days by this point, and we were walking along, we walk along, there's sort of like a little dirt road along the highway, which is obviously not how migrants walk, but it's how we walk with our vehicles and in a leapfrog. And one of the things, and I think there'll be some video about this later, or some, but we at the front of our walk, we have a prayer staff, and there are prayer ties that are little, it's a little bag filled with tobacco and made with prayer, and one is made for each of the remains that have been recovered that year that we're aware of, and they're made by Maria Padilla, and they're put on a prayer staff. Some of you who might be familiar with Indigenous communities might know about prayer staffs. So we walk with those. The person at the front of the walk carries the prayer ties at the front, and it's, I mean, it's a great honor to walk with them. That you feel this, I don't know how to explain this power that you feel, but we were walking along, and this truck pulled up, and this O'odham family got out, a family from the Tana O'odham Nation, and the man came over to us, and they brought some soda and some water to share, and he brought over, and he had a prayer staff with one little prayer bundle, and he told us that about a month before, he and his kids were out in the desert on the O'odham land, and they were collecting firewood, and they found a body, they found remains, and law enforcement was called, and he said, we didn't know what to do, like how to process that or how to do with that. So they made this prayer staff, and he gave it to us, and he said, would you take this and carry it home, and finish? And at the end of the migrant trail, the prayer ties are taken by Maria to her ceremony. And I just, I don't know, that's not really a story of hope in a sense, but it's a sense of understanding, like people don't know how to process how these deaths are happening. And I really do think of the migrant trail as ceremony, as a way for us to recognize that and honor that, and to declare holy that these lives that are taken, you know, not just lost, but they're taken. And I think that's one of the most powerful experiences, just this humble family with this one little prayer tie and, like, you know, Fanta, soda, and water to give us. And I was really, that I've never forgotten that. So, anyway.
Yeah. Thank you, Kat. Isaac has asked, are there other organizations, databases that track deaths in the borderlands in other US states along the border? For example, in California and Texas, and are there any organizations in Mexico that do the same?
So not in the way that is done in Arizona would be the short answer. There's multiple reasons that is. The biggest thing is the way death is handled in different states. So in Arizona, the majority of people that die on the border go to one place, and that's the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner, which has, I think, probably the best process, and they actually have a way to, in their system, mark that someone is, they call them a UBC, an unauthorized border crosser, and so then they're actually able to produce numbers of how many suspected migrants perished, you know, where it came through their office. When you go to California, when you go to Texas, each county is different. Some are sheriff coroner, some are a coroner, some are a medical examiner. And I remember because I did some research on this, and I remember talking to somebody from the medical examiner in Los Angeles, and I said, do you do this? And he said, oh, we don't differentiate. We don't treat anybody different. And he wasn't understanding. We weren't saying, do you treat them different? Do you have a way to say this was a border crosser? So a lot of the data we have comes directly from medical examiner data, where you can say this was a person, they came through the medical examiner's office, there are personal effects. It usually has to do with where they were found, their belongings. It might be that they had all like Mexican ID on them, or you know, money from Guatemala. If they are someone that's found more recently perished, the condition of their feet, and there's lots of different things that they use to determine someone is a a migrant. These other agencies don't have that in the same way, and so data, it's not apples to apples in other states. So I would say the short answer is no. There's not. There's not to say, like in Texas and in Brownsville and in California, there are some efforts to raise awareness, but they don't. It's not the same in that sense. So we could, I could maybe prepare in an email a couple of organizations in Texas and in California, but the short answer is no, mostly because of the limitations of how the data is collected. And so in Texas, it's even more complicated because people sometimes, they die on the river, they die drowning, and they go to the other side. They're on the Mexico side. Mexico does have a list that they produce every year of people who have died on the border that they do not claim as Mexicanos. They don't have a way to know that they were Mexicanos, and that would be the closest thing. But I don't know the details of how they use that number or how they get those numbers, but I have seen that in the past.
Okay. Key differences between the US, Mexico, and the US, Canada borders. I might be able to answer that at least somewhat. I grew up crossing the US, Canada border, and you just crossed. You didn't show papers. Every once in a while, you did. Obviously that's changed in recent years. It's become more highly secured. But it is nothing like the experience of crossing the US-Mexico border. For all the reasons that Kat mentioned, the walls, and then the high level of security, the profiling that happens, it does happen at the Canadian border, but not in the same way. So Kat, I don't know if you want to add to that, but just to answer that question very succinctly, it's two different worlds. So you don't see near as many, the militarization once you head down towards the border in Arizona or other places along the US-Mexico border. We don't have any of that really in Michigan. So.
I would agree with that. I mean, probably the number one difference would be the difference in the militarization of those areas. You don't have the checkpoints and the drag roads and stadium lights. And, we're in Tucson, we're 60 miles north of the border, and there's Border Patrol regularly throughout our community. And as you go into Phoenix, you get ICE. You don't have that throughout the whole northern border. It's less populated, but 80% of Arizona's border is wildlife refuges and national monuments and federally controlled. It's not heavily populated either, yet they have put billions of dollars into militarizing it. So again, racism, sorry, but that's the biggest difference. And that, I think that would hold for how people tend to be screened by agents on the border.
Tina is asking, has the experience with Border Patrol walkers of color been any different than white walkers? Oh, Kat, you're muted. Okay, go ahead. We're not hearing
Kat, if you
you.
could keep your mic unmuted, because otherwise we have to unmute you every time.
Okay, sorry. I was gonna.
That's okay. Thank you. Sorry, I let everybody else know except you because you were talking.
And sorry, I think I'm not the person to answer that question. So.
Yeah, I would say we have had a few times where, for one year when we went through the checkpoint, we had gone through many years, and people go through one at a time. We usually have two lawyers, Margot Cowan and Mel are two lawyers they're there. They let them know ahead of time. But one year, an agent came up. I was at the front of the line as we arrived, and he said, "All right, we're going to do a full inspection." And I laughed because I thought he was joking, because we had already been doing this like 8 years at that point. And he lined us all up, and he went through, and they asked every single person in a really aggressive way. We had one participant who was a legal permanent resident, had his green card on him because green card holders are people who have to carry their ID on at all times, so they don't surrender in the symbolic way we ask them to carry it. There was also a participant from San Antonio who was also a person of color, and the agent said, "Oh, you should know better. You know, you should have your ID." And he was like, "I'm a U.S. citizen. I don't know." And then I don't know what else to tell you. And then the green card holder was just, it was so aggressive and so awful that they chose not to walk in the future. They just really, it was really traumatizing for them to have that agent be like that. That being said, the following year and every year since, we've not had a problem. That was 1 year. I think that's typical, is that the reality is you never know what you're going to experience when you get to the border. There have been experiences, for example, a lot of members of the Pascuayaki tribe. There was one family who were all US citizens, and they were coming back from Nogales, went through the port, and the agent decided that their son, who was 8 years old, didn't look like them, and so wasn't going to let him in. They had his birth certificate, and he was like, nope. This was before the time where you had to have passports. So they were just like, what do you mean? Like, this is our son? And nope, didn't let him in. And they had to stay overnight. And the next morning, they went up to the port again. And the agent was like, sure, yeah, come on in. I mean, it is so arbitrary. You know, there's an expression, todo es cuestión de suerte. Like, it's all really a matter of luck. It's, you know, what kind of day that agent's had. People are not treated the same. But in general, I think our privilege and the fact that we're a huge group and are kind of known as an entity has mostly protected participants from having those kinds of experiences. And that's the 1 year that I would say it was really intense when this, you know, we had a full inspection by this one Border Patrol agent having a day.
Yeah. So thanks for the love we're getting in the Q&A. And then the last question, it looks like, at least right now, is, have you found migrants along the way? What do you do? Do you offer food, water, shelter? And the answer is yes, right? Yeah.
Yeah, again, we have found, or I would say not we have found, they have found us, because yeah. I would say that the truth is, every time we do the migrant trail, there are probably many migrants who have seen us, but they are, you know, they're hiding. They're not gonna, they don't know who we are. They don't know, you know, whether we're a friend or foe, I guess, for lack of a better word. The times that that they have made themselves known to us were people who needed some help. So we've had people who needed water, who needed food. We provide that. We've had one person who was just completely lost and wanted us to just call Border Patrol. Just wanted to go home, was just totally done. There was a conversation with them, and we ended up, you know, following their wish, because that's what they wanted, and, you know, that was their choice. And we waited with them until they were picked up. You know, the way we see them is anybody. If I'm out hiking and I run into someone who says, "Hey, I'm out of water. Do you have any water?" I'd spare what water I could, and we'd keep on our day. And that's pretty much the approach we take. If people approach us and need, you know, any sort of food, water, or medical attention, we absolutely would provide it. For the most part, I think people are aware of us, and mostly are hiding, you know, because they're trying to get through.
Yep. Looks like that's the end of our questions. Are there any more? Look, seeing the time, if there are no more questions, and I think we'll move to close this evening with the prayer, the migrant prayer that we have. It's in English, so I'll go ahead and read this for everyone. So again, thanks
Steve,
for joining.
did you want to people. So every day of the Migrant Trail, each morning we start with either the prayer or the vision, and we alternate between English and Spanish. So this is sort of how we center ourselves and how we start our day. So some mornings we start with the vision in English. The next day we'll start with the prayer in Spanish. The next day we'll do the vision in Spanish. So it just alternates. And so this is what that is. We have modified it a little bit to make it a little more open to multiple faiths. So anyway, that was just my intro to it.
Thank you. All right, so I'll go ahead and read this then. Loving Creator, full of love and mercy, I want to ask you for my migrant brothers and sisters. Have pity on them and protect them as they suffer mistreatments and humiliations on their journeys, are labeled as dangerous and marginalized for being foreigners. Make them be respected and valued for their dignity. Touch with your goodness the many that see them pass. Care for their families until they return to their homes, not with broken hearts, but rather with hopes fulfilled. Let it be. All right. Well, I think we'll sign off now, and we'll see you tomorrow night if you're able. If not, join with us as a community virtually as we move through the day with reflections, readings, podcasts, and then the evening speakers. Okay? Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.